Part 1, the London programme, Children in Care, production number 20004, date recorded 17th of January 1980, take 1.
Drugs like these are used on political prisoners in the Soviet Union. Now there's growing concern that they're also being widely used in Britain, not on prisoners, but on children in the care of local councils. Good evening. Until quite recently, there was no real question about what society ought to do with children who misbehaved. They were simply punished. And if they misbehaved very badly, they were locked up in institutions, which would, it was hoped, drum some sense into them. But for the past 10 years or so, a different approach has been tried. As psychiatry developed as a medical science, and as more and more sophisticated drugs were developed, so the more liberal notion grew that delinquency is not so much a crime that should be punished, as a condition that can, with the right treatment, be cured. In tonight's programme, we examine whether or not we've got it right. Stephen Scott reports.
On November the 3rd last year, in the Kent village of Forkham Green, Pamela Mould and Brian Butcher were married. For 19-year-old Pamela, the wedding was a triumph in itself. Only 3 years ago, she was being kept behind locked doors in a children's home. She was disruptive and often violent, and she faced the possibility of spending much of her life in secure institutions. At the age of 13, after a difficult childhood, Pamela had been taken into care by the local authority.
My parents got rather tired of me being brought home by the police quite frequently, which in the end got to twice a week, possibly. Then, on a voluntary basis, I was taken into care for 3 weeks or so until they decided what they were going to do. Then, after about a week of being in care, I was then found smashing a station window, and then I was taken into care by a court of law order.
While she was in care, Pamela was given powerful drugs to curb her violent behaviour. Some psychiatrists believe that the use of such drugs is the only way to deal with problem children. No one knows for certain how many problem children like Pamela there are in local authority care in Britain. In the London area, the figure's probably something over 200, and it's these children who present the system with its greatest difficulties. There are just over 100,000 children in care in England and Wales, 19,000 of them in the care of the London boroughs. Some of the inner London boroughs take far more children into care than any other councils in the country. In 1977, the latest year for which figures are available, for every 1,000 children under 18, Camden Council took into care 20.6. In Hackney, the figure was 21.4, and in Tower Hamlets, 31.3. That's almost 2.5 times the figure for Liverpool, and the figure for Birmingham was even lower. Another day at Middlesex Lodge in Hillingdon. Middlesex Lodge is one of 3 regional assessment centres for girls in the London area. There are 3 more for boys. Through these and smaller local assessment centres are channelled all the London children taken into care. The powers given to local authorities to take children into care are laid down in a number of Acts of Parliament. Most children are taken into care voluntarily, perhaps, for example, because their parents are ill, or homeless, or in the middle of an unpleasant divorce. Others are taken in compulsorily, under a care order, because, for example, their parents are ill-treating them. Only about 20% will have been taken into care because they've committed a criminal offence. The girls at Middlesex Lodge are observed and assessed over a period of 6 to 8 weeks before being sent to a more permanent home. The local authority has almost absolute power to place a child where it thinks fit. Of the 100,000 children presently in care, Roughly 35% will be fostered. 26% will be in children's homes, run directly by the local authority, or voluntary or private agencies. A further 6% will be sent to community homes with education, that's the old approved schools, and the rest are either allowed to go home or are in more specialised units. The theory is that a child will be found a home to meet his or her needs. The reality is that for the older and more difficult child, this often proves impossible. Some of them will end up being moved from home to home, becoming increasingly disruptive.
I think it's true and regrettable that there are failures of the childcare system. I think one has to bear in mind that they may well be failures before they ever come into the childcare system. And the sort of problems that residential staff have to cope with in terms of the verbal abuse and even physical abuse from these children are very taxing on the staff. Now, if you get a home which is perhaps understaffed, is relying on comparatively inexperienced staff, it's not difficult to see that you can easily get an explosive situation, and a point may be reached where that home can no longer care with the problems of that young person.
It's children like these, severely disturbed and often violent, who are most likely to be subjected to treatment with drugs, although few of them have been diagnosed as having specific mental disorders. Dr. Colin Brewer is a consultant psychiatrist who works at Middlesex Lodge. He described for us the drugs most often used.
The drug in the two nearest ampules is Modicate, and the other ampule is Dipixol. They're both very similar drugs. The orange tablet is a sort of tablet version of Modicate. The blue one is Stelazine, which is quite commonly used, as is the haloperidol, the pink one. These are all used primarily in the treatment of schizophrenia. They can certainly be used for calming, but you need very high doses, and you tend to get rather unpleasant side effects of that sort of dose. I don't think it's being too melodramatic to say it is this group of drugs which has been strongly criticised by many bodies, including our own Royal College of Psychiatrists, in its use by the Russians and perhaps other regimes for giving to people who are not schizophrenic, simply in order to keep them quiet, which it will certainly do if you give it in high enough doses. It also can cause very unpleasant side effects in high doses.
These drugs are not, in fact, used at Middlesex Lodge, and no one knows precisely how often they are given to severely disturbed children elsewhere. But Ron Lacey, the co-author of a new book on children in care, believes many psychiatrists regularly prescribe them.
I think it's probably now common knowledge that drugs are being widely used to control children. In terms of quantifying the problem, that's very, very difficult, in that it's usually done by one doctor with one child. And I think that is also a serious problem. In the book, we are calling for an inquiry into the extent of the use of these drugs. And I think the sorts of issues we would want to know is we want to know who is being prescribed the drugs, in what quantities, and for what specific diagnoses.
In March of last year, before the general election, Dr. Gerard Vaughan, now Minister of Health, expressed his concern about the use of these drugs on children in care. He said, "I'm afraid that far too often drugs are given to a child not for his own sake, but simply to quieten him down. This year, the year of the child, a long, hard look should be taken at how we treat our problem children." And now, in the London area, local authorities like Kensington and Chelsea Council are also becoming increasingly worried about the issue. One of the places that has given rise to this concern is this home for girls in Gravesend. Kendall House is run by a Church of England group, the Canterbury and Rochester Diocesan Council for Social Responsibility.